what's happening? Welcome to the Pleasure Points podcast. I'm your host, James Rohr. Thank you so much for being here. This is the first podcast of 2020. I'm a little late, ringing in the new year with you guys. Jen and I had a whirlwind holiday season. We had Wyatt down here in Miami, and then we were out in Arizona visiting my dad. And then we went to Colorado and then Utah for doTERRA training, and now finally back, finally ready to launch into the podcast. So this is a good one. I'm going to share with you some highlights of a call that I did with my coaching group the other day, and I was just feeling really exploring some ideas that I found to be interesting. So I wanted to pop on here, share with you guys. And then you can email me at pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on Instagram at James E. Rohr. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And if you've used some of these approaches before, what you think about it, and we can carry on the conversation there. So welcome to the show. All right. So I had a call the other day with a potential client, and this call had been rescheduled a couple of times because she was sick. So the time came for the call again, and she answers, and her voice was obviously hoarse, right? And we were talking, and, it turns out she'd had laryngitis. And as we were chatting, just kind of getting rapport in the beginning part of the call, I was like, oh, maybe, as we get into this, we'll see kind of if there's what the other reason may have been that you lost your voice. And she laughed, and she was like, oh my gosh, if you could tell me that would be amazing. And so we get into the call, and I'm asking her, what's not working in her love life. And she starts telling me about this guy that she's been seeing for a while as like friends. They've known each other, similar kind of circles, but she's like catching feelings for him, but she hasn't really told him exactly how she feels. And anytime that she has sort of hinted at having feelings for the guy, he just like kind of kicks her back into the friend zone. But she hasn't really come out and just said exactly what it is that she's feeling and how she feels about him and all that. So when that became like really, really clear, I threw out there, I was like, oh, well, do you think it's possible that you're losing your voice is actually just a sort of physical expression of what's going on in your emotional world, in that, you're not using your voice to actually communicate with this person that you care about how you feel? I thought I was like being super profound. I was pleased with myself in that question. And she was like, no, it's just laryngitis. It's been going around. A lot of people in my neighborhood have gotten it. So no, that's not at all. It's just laryngitis. Oh my God, I died. I started cracking up. I thought it was hysterical. It was like, it's a great reaction, right? And I love that because that's the shit, right? That is the thing with all of this kind of mind, body, spirit stuff, where it's like, is it that your soul or your spirit, your body is communicating with you through your body, through your symptoms to try to get your attention? Like possibly. And is it also possible that, laryngitis was going around and that's why you got it? Like, of course, that's entirely possible as well. And so it's like, it's up to us to add or extrapolate as much meaning as we want from the things. And I do think that, my assessment was accurate, and that if we're not really willing to go to that depth, if we're not really willing to look at, some of these other underlying causes or things that might be happening, it's real easy just to stay on the superficial level and be like, yeah, I don't know, it's just been going around. It has nothing to do with my emotional state, right? And that call wasn't the time to talk about, well, what led you to be susceptible to that, and if you were healthy and in alignment, perhaps you wouldn't have gotten sick, And so you guys that have listened to this podcast for a while, we've talked about these things about, understanding what some of your symptoms may mean and what's really going on when you're getting sick. And I still do believe that our soul, if our spirit, if your angels, your guides, like God, whatever, is trying to get your attention, that usually it begins with very subtle messages. You get like a little feeling, a little urge, like something very quiet and like delicate. It's just trying to get your attention. And if we're paying attention, we can see it, we can feel it, we can make an adjustment, and then that's it. It just stays there. Or if we choose to ignore that and we blow past it, or we pretend that we didn't hear that and that wasn't actually what was happening, then ultimately it gets to the place where the loudest signal that our soul or spirit or whatever God can give us, the loudest message that we can get, is when our physical body starts to break down. Whether that's short term with a virus, or longer term things with chronic conditions, or of course the more serious from there. And so that there's, I think that anytime that we're sick, I don't want you overthinking it, but I do think that there's an opportunity to ask ourselves, okay, what else might be going on here? Just as a theoretical exercise, what might my body be trying to communicate to me? What might my body be reflecting back to me that I'm missing? Like with weight gain, am I holding on too much? Am I trying to hide? Am I trying to be invisible? If it's weight loss, do I not believe that I'm, if you've lost too much weight, right? It's like, do I not believe that I'm worthy of nourishment? The voice stuff is a big one. That's what I want to talk about today is communication, right? Because the voice, whether it's, it could be thyroid issues, it could be laryngitis, could be chronic sore throats, could be, reflux issues with phlegm in the throat, right? All of these things can signal an imbalance in our ability to communicate. And so, to that end, one of the things that I've been reading in the last 6 months or so has been this book by Thich Nhat Hanh called The Art of Communicating. I know I've referenced it in a couple of other podcasts, but I want to take a look at some of his concepts because I find it to be fascinating. And I'm far from like a Buddhist scholar or any of that stuff. But on the surface level, I've always been a little kind of off-put by the focus on suffering. And this idea that sort of like life is suffering. And I think that might be kind of a misinterpretation. And that's where I'd love to hear from you guys. If there are any Buddhist scholars out there, people that know a lot more about it, I'd love to hear if you have other references, sources for me to take a look at, because I'd like to understand more of this concept of suffering. Because initially when I first heard about it, it seemed like just too much of the emphasis was on suffering. And I kind of was off-put by this idea that suffering is inevitable or that it's always there. And I suppose if you follow the four sort of noble truths of Buddhism, then, you're not entrenched in suffering. But suffering and in The Art of Communicating, he talks quite a bit about suffering. And as I was reading some of the mantras that he talks about that I'll share with you guys, it struck me, like I felt a physiological shift in my body. And I felt how communication could be softer and kinder, which was interesting to read a mantra about suffering, but then to also have my mind be like, well, I don't know if somebody is suffering. I don't know that life has to inevitably be suffering. But clearly when we look around the world, people are hurting. And especially if we're having an interaction with a loved one or someone close to us or someone that, our attachment issues are being triggered, that we might be coming from our own place of suffering. So one of the things that he talks about as like a tenet of good communication is presence. And I absolutely love this because, that's something that I work hard to embody in my own life, which is just being present and witnessing and trying my best to see things as they are and to just be with myself and to be with Wyatt and to be with Jen and be with the people in my community, that when I'm with them to really just be and to see it as it is. And he talks about how really in order to communicate effectively, we have to be able to be present. And so this is a great opportunity, to take a look at all the times that I might try to detach or, if I get nervous or if I was overthinking something or if I got too far in the future, how I can, just sort of recognize that is an instinct or a learned behavior, and that I can relearn just to be and to listen and to really take in what somebody is saying. But what he was, he talks about in this book, he's got these, I think there's like 6 of them, these different mantras that he suggests to say to yourself. You might even have an opportunity to say it to someone else that you're communicating with. But to really come back and to say it to yourself, to remind yourself of these things while you are having these communications. Now, if you're on a first or second date, obviously this might be a little much. Practicing presence is like, top of the list. That you can definitely do. But some of these other things, you may or may not certainly speak them out loud, but there are good reminders. And so the first mantra that he says is to say, I'm here for you. And, this is beautiful, right? I mean, to just be like, hey, I'm here. I'm offering my presence. My presence is here, and this is what's happening. So it's a way of, saying to them, like, recognizing what you are doing when you're listening to somebody, and also affirming to yourself, like, I'm here. I'm present. I'm in this space. I'm in this moment. This is what's going on. The second one, I know you were there, and I am happy. I love this. Because it's future. I mean, it's like it's speaking into a reality that you may not really be feeling, or you may not be conscious of. But when we come back to just presence and to say, I know you were there. I see you, right? I see you taking up space, and you are existing across from me, and I am happy. It takes us out of some of our own drama, some of our own fears and anxieties that might cause us to like leave the moment. And to also just affirm, like, oh, I'm happy. And it's a way to say, okay, here we are, even with our differences. We are 2 human beings who happen to be enjoying this playground of earth at the same time. And we happen to be in the same room, speaking the same language, trying to come to an understanding together. And that all by itself, the miracle of each of those things, can be enough to allow us to say, and I am happy. So I love that. The third one, I know you suffer, and that's why I'm here. So this was one that kind of is like, I don't, like, who am I to say what I know? And certainly, like, I wouldn't say that I know anything about anybody. We're observing, I'm listening, right? We're trying to feel. But this is the one that I have a little bit of an issue with, the sort of the presumption of, like, I know you suffer. And I think this is part of the issue that I have with some of the Buddhism as I understand it. And again, I'm not a scholar. I haven't studied it. And I don't know all the ins and outs of it. But the assumption that somebody is suffering. But now if somebody is heated, if they're clearly hurt, if they are struggling with something, they're challenged by something, right, then it's not that far of a stretch to say that, I see that there is suffering that is happening, right? The language, the words, the vibration, the frequency, whatever you want to call it, right? You're clearly not like in this place of harmony. So there's some suffering that's there. And, that's why I'm here. I'm here. He talks about, we give each other the opportunity to lessen another person's suffering by our existence, which is an interesting thing because we know on a neurological level that when we put ourselves in a position of charity, of giveaway, of service, that's going to activate some of the reward centers and we generally feel better. And so this is a way of doing that. There's a kind of a martyrdom aspect to this that I don't like, and yet, as I was going through it and certainly having a conversation with somebody who was suffering, it did have a way, this particular affirmation of, I know you suffer and that's why I'm here, did have a way of kind of ratcheting down my own heightened emotions and to just get into a place of like, okay, here we are. It's like it goes back to the previous one. I know you were there and I'm happy. Now, this next one is a huge one and it requires like massive humility, especially if you're the one who is reacting or initiating a conversation that might be heated, if you're upset, if somebody does something the way that you don't want it to go down, right? And you find yourself in an elevated state. And he says, the mantra is going to be, I suffer. I want you to know, please help. And again, like, I don't think that it's nobody's job to help another person. And yet there is that opportunity that is there, especially in relationships, to be able to acknowledge our own suffering and then to have the courage and the humility to share that and to ask for assistance. It knocks the ego down. It seems to move us from like needing to be right or to prove a point. And it is just simply saying, like, in this moment, I'm suffering. Please help. And what I would add is that in any of these kind of conversations, knowing the outcome that you want is going to be advantageous. It's helpful to know, like, where do you want this to go? What's the direction that you want? What's the outcome or the actionable steps that you want? So, like, in this case, like, please help me. Like, what is that help that you're looking for? But sometimes we may not know. But just being able to come back to that affirmation of, like, I suffer, I want you to know, and please help is like huge. This is massive. And then the next one is he's going to say, this is a happy moment. And again, I love that because it's speaking into existence what might not have been a happy moment, which might not feel good, especially if you have issues with handling conflict, if you tend to be someone that does run away, or you tend to be someone who wants to prove a point, and you're like, you pull out your ledger of your resentments and you're like, here's the thing and the thing and the thing and the thing. But in order to just come back to, like, this is a happy moment. We've got two human beings who are here by the miracle of life or randomness or a divine intervention, like whatever. It is a miracle that we are here and that we get the opportunity to communicate with each other. And so why not just say this is a happy moment, even if there's a whole other array of feelings that are happening. And then the last one that he says is, you are partly right. So some of us are going to have issues with that one, right? But again, for me, the way I hear that is that it comes from this place of humility. It's like, it's just humbling yourself. And it's like disarming the ego. And he'd be like, yeah, you're partly right. These tenets, these affirmations, I think I'm playing with them now, and I wanted to share them with you guys because, I've already found, especially that one, like when I found myself in an elevated emotion over the holidays, to just recognize, like, okay, I'm suffering here. And I'm engaging in this conversation because I need some help, right? Some clarity, some love, some nurturing, some extra information, like whatever. It helped me to just kind of ratchet things down. But one of the conversations that was happening with some of my clients was that harsh inner critic, right? When that inner critic is showing up and saying, you're a piece of garbage, you'd never do things right, of course this would end up this way, right? What I think is a phenomenal approach is to take those same affirmations and to remind yourself that when you sit down from that inner critic, like we've talked about before, offering it a cup of tea, inviting it into your house instead of fighting with it. Invite it in and hear what it has to say, while at the same time affirming all of these affirmations, right? I mean, is it true, right? I'm here for you. The inner critic is saying some shit and you choose to sit down and listen to it. I'm here for you. I'm listening, right? I know you were there and I'm happy, right? I see the critic sitting there and I'm happy. I'm happy that we can have this conversation. I'm happy that I've invited you into my home. I'm happy that you're sharing with me your insights. If I'm alive, if you're hearing this podcast, or if you're alive, you're having this experience, isn't it beautiful? Everything in your life has happened that has led you to still be alive in this moment. Is that not reason enough to at least acknowledge that there's some kind of happiness and that inner critic may have kept you alive? Those things that we may not like about ourselves, it may have done just enough to keep you alive, to have this opportunity of this moment. So can we not be happy with these things that are inside of us, even if we don't like them sometimes? I know you suffer and that's why I'm here, right? That inner critic is clearly coming from a place of hurt. I know you suffer and that's why I'm here. I suffer and I want you to know, please help. Perhaps that kind of humility and acceptance, saying, oh, this inner critic might actually have something constructive to say. I did a whole podcast on this last year, right? That inner critic may have something useful, a contribution that it can make. And so let's humble ourselves. Let's listen to what it has to say. We don't have to believe it, but we can listen to it. I suffer. I want you to know, please help. So instead of fighting with that inner critic, maybe we can enlist its help. What have you seen? What have you learned from all those years of having to be hard and having to be hard on ourselves? What can you teach me about this? All right. This is a happy moment. I'm listening to myself. I'm opening up to a conversation. And then you are partly right. A lot of times the inner critic has some things to say that are accurate. The data is accurate. The story and the judgment that they levy might, not be nice. The tone certainly usually could use some improvement. But there might be something there that is partly right. And that's okay. We can surrender to that. And we can still choose what we want to focus on, what we want to believe, and the action steps that we want to take from there. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think about this. If you've read the book, let me know what you think of the book. If you haven't, it's called The Art of Communicating by Thich Nhat Hanh. I'd love to hear about it. Again, if you have more Buddhist resources or if you've experimented with these ideas of suffering, I'd love to hear what that experience is like for you. Again, you can message me on Instagram at James E. Rohr or hit up the show at pleasurepointspodcast@gmail.com. And, hopefully this will help you, to connect the heart and open up that throat chakra so that you can provide your presence. You can speak into existence what it is that you're looking to create. And, that we can all be a little bit more kind with each other. So thank you guys, as always, for being here. Let's have a great 2020 and kick it off by having some kind and gentle and heartfelt speech. So thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.